At sunrise, Mara Quinn stood where her barn had been and counted what the fire had left her. 1 stone foundation, 2 blackened fence posts, a milk pail buckled flat on one side, and no cattle. All 61 were gone. By sunrise, 12 neighbors stood along the county road. Some had spent the night passing buckets. Others had only watched. They brought blankets, coffee, and the careful faces people wore when they wanted credit for coming, but not blame for arriving too late. Now, as Mara faced the empty pasture, no one stepped through the gate to ask what came next. Then a rider came through the smoke, leading a red calf with the Quinn brand on its hip. He wore a dust-gray coat and rode a dun horse dark with sweat. A pale rope scar crossed the front of his throat. He stopped near the ruined corral, lifted 2 fingers to his mouth, and gave a low 3-note whistle. The calf pulled toward him at once. Mara felt the cold before she understood why. Owen had used that whistle every evening at feeding time. Only Mara, their daughter, and Owen himself had ever called the herd that way. Owen had been dead for 3 years. The stranger looked at the empty pasture. "They did not take them east," he said. His voice was rough and quiet. "The tracks were made to lie." Mara stepped through the ash until she stood within arm's reach of him. "Who are you?" The rider looked toward the neighbors on the road, then back at the burned house. "A man who came too late once," he said. "I would rather not do it twice." The previous afternoon, in October 1887, the Quinn Ranch in Wyoming Territory had still been standing. It was not a grand place. The house had 2 rooms. The barn roof showed 3 different shades of cedar, and the porch dipped at the western corner. But the grass was good, the cattle were sound, and Mara's deed covered 320 acres, including the narrow cut through Needle Ridge. A note against the herd came due in December, but the cattle could cover it as long as they remained hers. That cut was the only safe cattle pass between Stone Gap and the new loading pens at Redding Junction. Mara had never cared much about that when Owen was alive. They used the pass twice a year and let neighboring ranchers use it without charge as long as they closed the gates. Then the railroad built the loading pens. Suddenly, land no one had noticed became the shortest route to money. Harlan Voss noticed first. He owned more cattle than anyone near Stone Gap, along with the feed warehouse and enough influence to make people lower their voices when they said his name. He came to Mara's porch on a bright October afternoon with a contract folded inside his coat. Mara was repairing a halter. Her 15-year-old daughter, Lucy, sat on the steps, sorting horseshoe nails into a tobacco tin. Voss did not remove his hat. "I will give you $1,800 for the ranch," he said. Mara pulled the leather through the buckle and checked the stitching. "You offered $1,200 in June. I have become more generous." The railroad became more useful. Voss smiled as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "The place is too much for 2 women. Winter will prove it, even if pride has not." Lucy stopped sorting nails. Mara kept her eyes on the halter. "We made it through 3 winters. With Owen. 2 without him." Voss stepped closer to the porch. "The loading pens change things. Every herd in the basin will need needle pass. Your fence, your cattle, your little house, all of it sits in the way of work that matters." Mara finally looked up. "Owen cut that trail before your men knew the ridge had a north face. And now Owen is buried on the hill." Lucy rose. Mara put one hand across the girl's wrist before she could speak. Voss held out the contract. $1,800. Enough to clear your winter note, buy a proper house in Laramie, and find work that does not require pulling calves in sleet. Mara did not take it. "You think I do not know what the pass is worth. I think you know what it costs to keep refusing me." His voice lost its pleasant edge. Mara folded the halter and set it beside her. "You can use the pass under the same rule as everyone else, 1 herd at a time. Gates closed behind you, no charge. I do not want permission. I know. I want control. I know that too." Voss stared at her for a long moment. Then he tucked the contract back into his coat. "Winter is coming, Mrs. Quinn. It comes every year. This one may arrive early." He turned and walked to his horse. Lucy waited until he was beyond the gate. Was that a threat? Mara picked up the tobacco tin and handed it to her. "It was a man hoping we scare easier than we do." Lucy looked toward the ridge. "Do we? Some days." Mara gathered the repaired halter. Courage is not waking up without fear. It is feeding the stock anyway. They worked until dusk. Mara checked the south fence while Lucy brought the milk cow in. They counted the herd together, as they did every night. 47 cows, 13 calves. One Red Bull Owen had named Bishop because the animal stood apart from the others as if judging them. 61 head. At the barn door, Mara gave the 3-note whistle. The lead cow turned first, then the rest followed toward the hay rack. Owen had taught Mara the call during their first spring on the ranch. "Cattle remember what feeds them," he had said. Mara had laughed. People do too. Not as reliably. After his death, she kept using the whistle because the herd knew it and because changing it would have felt like agreeing that some things were finished. That evening, a stranger rode into Stone Gap and asked where Owen Quinn lived. By supper, the story had reached Mara's kitchen. Lucy decided he was a bounty hunter. Mrs. Avery said he might be Owen's cousin, Mara said. "Mine has a better ending." "It does not have an ending. That is why it is better." They had nearly finished eating when the dog began to growl beneath the porch. A knock came at the door. Mara reached for the old revolver kept on the shelf, but she did not lift it. "Who is it?" "Jonah Reed." The voice was rough enough to sound painful. Mara opened the door 3 inches. The stranger from town stood in the lamplight. He was somewhere in his late 40s, lean, weathered, and tired in a way that had little to do with the road. The scar at his throat disappeared beneath his collar. "What do you want with Owen?" Mara asked. Jonah's eyes moved past her toward the small room, then returned to her face. "I was told he died 3 years ago. I did not know." "That does not answer my question." He removed his hat. "I owed him something." "Money?" "No." "What then?" Jonah looked toward Lucy, who had stepped quietly behind her mother. A chance to ask whether he needed anything. Mara almost closed the door. 3 years is late for asking. Yes. He did not defend himself. That made her pause. From the yard came the faint sound of cattle shifting in the dark. Jonah listened. "You still use his call?" Mara's hand tightened on the edge of the door. "What call?" "The 3 notes." Lucy stepped closer. "How do you know that?" Jonah put on his hat. "Owen and I moved cattle together once." "When?" Mara asked. "Long ago, south of Fort Laramie." "Why did he never mention you?" Jonah's gaze lowered. He might not have been proud of the circumstances. "I was not." He looked back toward the road. "I am staying at the livery. I will leave in the morning." "That is all?" "It is all you owe me." He walked away before she could ask anything else. Lucy waited until the hoofbeats faded. "He is hiding something." "He knew the whistle," Mara said, sliding the bolt into place. "For tonight, that is all we know." The fire began after midnight. The dog woke Mara by clawing at the bedroom door. She smelled smoke before she opened her eyes. By the time she reached the kitchen, orange light was moving across the yard. The barn roof had caught at both ends. Not one end, both. Mara understood that detail immediately. Lucy, boots, now. The girl appeared in the doorway with her hair loose and her nightdress tucked into her trousers. The cattle were already moving, not scattering from the fire. Moving in a line through the north gate, men on horseback drove them toward the ridge. Mara ran for the corral, but a burning beam fell from the barn door and struck the ground in front of her. Sparks rose around her boots. "Get the horses!" she shouted. Lucy pulled the 2 saddle horses from the side pen while Mara reached the house again. The kitchen wall had begun to burn. Beneath the stone hearth was a shallow iron box containing the deed, the county survey copy, Owen's field compass, and every receipt that proved the ranch belonged to them. Mara wrapped her apron around her hand, dragged the box free, and carried it outside against her chest. A rifle cracked from the dark. The shot struck the water barrel beside her and split one iron band. Lucy screamed. Mara dropped behind the trough. A rider near the north gate called out, "Stay down and keep breathing, widow." Then the herd disappeared into the night. Mara knew the voice. It belonged to one of Voss's foremen. She could not prove it. A voice in darkness was not a signature, and fear changed the shape of what people remembered. But she knew. The first neighbors arrived before the barn roof collapsed. They formed a bucket line, but the wind carried sparks faster than water could stop them. More people came from town, some worked, some watched. Harlan Voss arrived in a clean coat just before dawn. He stood beside the road with his men and told everyone what a terrible thing fire was. Mara crossed the yard toward him, blackened to the elbows. "You should have stayed home," she said. Voss looked at the ruined barn. "I came to offer help. Bring back my cattle." His expression barely changed. "You think I took them? I think men who work for you drove them through my north gate while my roof burned." A few neighbors looked down. Voss lowered his voice. "Grief can make a person reckless. So can believing no one will stand against you." He glanced toward the soot-blackened iron box beside Lucy, then looked away too quickly. Mara noticed. Voss lifted his hat to Lucy. "The offer remains. 1,800. Considering the condition of the improvements, it is generous." Mara took one step closer. "The ranch is not for sale. Without cattle, it is not a ranch." "Then you had better hope mine are found." Voss smiled. "I always hope for a just outcome." He rode away as the eastern sky began to pale. That was when Jonah Reed came through the smoke with the red calf. He had found it tangled in sage, half a mile north of the ranch. A fresh rope burn marked one hind leg. The calf's mother was gone. Mara gave it water while Jonah knelt beside the north gate. The thieves had dragged brush behind their horses to blur the tracks. They had also driven a small group east for nearly a mile, then doubled back through a dry wash. Jonah showed Mara where the false trail turned. "They wanted the sheriff looking toward the territorial line," he said. "Can you follow the real trail?" "Yes." "Then saddle your horse." He looked at her scorched sleeves. "You have not slept." "Neither have my cattle." Lucy approached with the iron box. "I am going too." "No," Mara said. "Mama, you are taking the papers to Mrs. Avery. You will stay in town until I send for you. I can ride better than half the men who watched the fire. That is not a difficult standard." Lucy's jaw tightened. Mara put both hands on her shoulders. "If this is about the pass, those papers matter more than a third rider. I need them safe. I need you safe. You cannot promise that." "No," Mara said, "but I can make it more likely." Lucy nodded once. Before leaving, she opened the iron box and handed Mara the county survey map. "You will need this more than the bank receipts." The paper carried Owen's neat brown lines, but Mara had walked every measured stretch with him, held the chain, driven stakes, and drawn half the notes herself. The map was their work, not his secret. Mara tucked it inside her coat. She and Jonah rode north before the sun cleared the hills. For the first 2 miles, neither spoke. Jonah studied the ground. Mara studied the worn saddle, the rifle that stayed in its boot, and the way he favored his left shoulder on a climb. At the dry wash, he dismounted and touched a broken stem of rabbit brush. 20 riders? Mara asked. 8, maybe 9? With 61 cattle? They are pushing hard. That herd does not push well when Bishop is tired. The bull? You remember his name? Jonah stood. Owen wrote it in a letter once. Mara's hand went still on the reins. You received letters from my husband? 2. When? Years before he met you. What did he write? That he had found a place worth staying. Mara waited. Jonah mounted again. That was the second letter. And the first? He said I was not to pay him back. Mara turned her mare across Jonah's path. Pay him back for what? The dun horse stopped. Jonah looked toward the ridge. When I was 22, a horse with a changed brand was found in my string. The owner's brothers caught me before I could prove I had bought it. His fingers touched the scar at his throat. They put a rope over a cottonwood branch. Owen saw the old brand scar, rode 30 miles for the seller, and brought him back before the brothers finished. He saved your life. He gave me time for the truth to arrive. Why did he never tell me? Jonah's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile. Because it was a decent thing. Owen did not keep a list of those. Mara looked down at the map beneath her coat. Why come now? I heard a drover mention his name in Casper. He said Owen Quinn had died and his widow was holding Needle Pass alone. So you came to repay him? I came to ask whether you needed help. You arrived after the fire. Yes. Mara moved her mare aside. Then help me find the herd. They followed the real trail into the broken country north of Stone Gap. By noon, Mara understood the thieves' plan. They were not taking the cattle to market. They were taking them to Needle Pass. The route bent west toward an old holding basin behind the ridge. Voss could hide 61 animals there, mix them into his larger herd, alter the brands, and reach the loading pens before the territorial stock inspector, due at Reading Junction the next morning, could examine them. Mara unfolded the map across her saddle. There is another entrance, she said. Jonah leaned closer. I do not see it. It is not a road. It is a drainage cut here. She tapped a faint line south of the basin. In dry weather, a horse can pass, a wagon cannot. How do you know? I measured it. Jonah looked at her. You held the survey chain. I drew half these notes. His gaze returned to the map. Then Voss made the same mistake most men do. What mistake? He thought the dead man was the only one who understood the work. They reached the drainage cut near sunset. Fresh hoof marks covered the ground. A strip of red hide and a smear of blood marked one narrow turn. Bishop, Mara said. He rubs that shoulder when he is crowded. They left the horses behind the ridge and climbed on foot. From the top, they could see the hidden basin below. The Quinn herd stood mixed among nearly 300 Voss cattle. Men worked beside a fire heating running irons. One cow bawled as a fresh mark was burned across the old Quinn brand. Mara's fingernails cut into her palms. Jonah touched her sleeve. Not now. I know. 9 men, Jonah said. 2 rifles on the ridge. I can see. He released her sleeve. Mara watched the herd instead of the men. Bishop stood near the northern wall. 3 Quinn cows stayed close to him. The lead cow, a yellow-faced animal named June, had been separated and tied near the branding fire. That was why the herd had moved so badly. Voss's men understood force, but not habit. Mara studied the old gates, the wind through the rocks, and the southern cut. Then she refolded the map. We go back. Jonah looked surprised. You do not want to free them? I want to bring them home. There is a difference. If we open that gate tonight, 300 frightened cattle will scatter across 20 miles of rock, mine will disappear with his, and Voss will call it confusion. What do you need? Witnesses. The town watched your barn burn. Then they already know how to stand in one place. They returned to Stone Gap after midnight. Mara slept for less than an hour on the floor of Mrs. Avery's storeroom. At dawn, she walked into the general store while men were buying coffee and feed. Conversation stopped. Harlan Voss stood near the stove. He had arrived before her, which meant someone had carried word from the ridge. Mara looked around the room. I found my cattle. No one spoke. They are in the holding basin behind Needle Pass. Voss's men are burning new brands over mine. Voss set down his cup. That is a serious accusation. You are welcome to come see it. I do not answer invitations from trespassers. The basin is on my deed. A rancher near the window shifted his weight. Voss looked at him, and the man became still. Mara placed the survey map on the counter. The pass, the basin, and the southern cut are inside the Quinn boundary. The county copy says the same. Voss gave a small laugh. Paper will not bring your cattle back. Mara turned toward the room. He burned my barn because he thought the deed would burn with it. He took the herd because without cattle, I cannot pay the winter note. If the bank takes this place, he buys Needle Pass for a fraction of what he offered me and charges every one of you to move stock through land Owen and I kept open for free. A man near the flour barrels stared at the floor. Another rubbed his jaw. Voss picked up his coat. You are frightened and tired. Go sleep before you say something a judge will make you pay for. Mara blocked his path. Your herd moves tonight. His eyes changed. It lasted less than a second. It was enough. You have until then, she said. To do what? To decide whether you want to bring my cattle back through town yourself. Voss leaned close enough that only she could hear him. No one here will stand beside you. Mara looked past him at the people who had watched the fire. Then they will live with what comes after. Voss left. For a long moment, the only sound in the store was coffee boiling over onto the stove. Mrs. Avery lifted the pot away from the flame. What is your plan? She asked. Mara looked at her. You believe me. I believe the look on Harlan Voss's face when you said tonight. The rancher near the window cleared his throat. My note comes due in December. So does mine, another man said. Mara rolled up the map. I am not asking anyone to fight him. What are you asking? Mrs. Avery said. Bring wagons, lanterns, wet blankets, every cattle bell you own, and all the salt in this store that can be replaced. The room remained quiet. Then Lucy stepped from the storeroom carrying the iron document box. I will bring the first wagon. Mara turned sharply. You were told to stay here. I am here. You know what I meant. Yes. Lucy set the box on the counter. Papa used to say, a gate is only useful if someone closes it at the right time. You cannot be at both ends of Needle Pass. Mara looked at her daughter and saw Owen so clearly that anger became impossible to hold. You stay with the wagons, she said. Lucy nodded. You follow every instruction. Another nod. You do not improvise. Lucy hesitated. Mrs. Avery hid a smile. Say it, Mara said. I do not improvise. By noon, 7 people had agreed to help. By evening, there were 23. Fear was still there, but it changed shape when people realized Voss's plan would reach every ranch in the basin. The blacksmith brought chains. Farm families brought wagons. The schoolteacher gathered lanterns. Mrs. Avery gave up 3 sacks of salt and complained about the price while loading them herself. The county sheriff listened to Mara's account and said he could not arrest Harlan Voss on a map, and a voice heard in the dark. Mara did not ask him to. Ride to Reading Junction, she said. The territorial stock inspector is due tomorrow morning. Bring him to Needle Pass before sunrise. The sheriff studied her face. What will he find? 61 cattle with fresh burns over an older brand. And if Voss moves them first? He will. The sheriff looked toward the wagons gathering outside. What are you planning? To make sure he moves the right ones. They left Stone Gap under a moon thin as a shaving of bone. No one sang or made speeches. Wheels creaked, harness buckles clicked, and every person wondered what Voss would do when he found them waiting. Mara divided the group at the southern mouth of Needle Pass. Lucy took 6 people and 2 wagons through the drainage cut. Their job was to reach the old side corral and open its stone gate. Mrs. Avery and the schoolteacher stretched a line of lanterns along the western slope. The blacksmith placed wagons across the northern fork, leaving one path open toward the Quinn Ranch. Jonah watched Mara mark each position on the ground with the toe of her boot. You planned cattle drives with Owen. he said. I planned most of them. He failed to mention that. He liked being thought useful. Jonah's rough laugh surprised them both. Mara handed him a wet blanket. You and 3 riders take the ridge. When Voss's herd enters, light the damp sage along the eastern rocks. Smoke only, no open flame. And if his men draw, you ride away. That is your answer? Since the fire, I have watched men use guns to make foolishness look like authority. I do not intend to help them. Jonah nodded. What will you do? Mara lifted the small feed chain she had taken from the burned wagon. One end was blackened, but the iron links were intact. Call my cattle. Near midnight, the ground began to tremble. Voss's herd entered Needle Pass in a dark, moving mass. The first cattle came slowly, then pressure from behind pushed them faster. Riders shouted. Hooves struck stone. Dust climbed into the moonlight. Mara waited behind the southern wall with her mare and the red calf tied beside her. The calf bawled once. Somewhere in the herd, a cow answered. Mara heard June before she saw her. The lead cow's yellow face appeared between 2 black steers. A fresh Voss brand covered part of the Quinn mark, but the scar beneath it was still visible. Mara struck the feed chain twice against the iron rim of an empty wagon wheel. Clang, clang. The sound cut through the noise. June lifted her head. Mara gave the 3-note whistle. The cow turned. Another Quinn cow turned with her. Mara released the red calf. It ran toward its mother, and both animals moved toward the open side corral. Then Bishop stopped in the middle of the pass. The cattle behind him crowded forward. Voss's riders cursed and pushed their horses into the herd. Mara struck the chain again. Clang, clang. Lucy opened the stone gate inside the side basin. Mrs. Avery's lantern line rose along the western slope. On the eastern rocks, damp sage began to smoke. The herd saw light on one side, smoke on the other, and an open path ahead. Mara rode into the pass. June! The lead cow came toward her. So did the red calf's mother. Then the Quinn cattle began to peel away from Voss's herd, not all at once, but in small familiar groups. Cows followed calves. Calves followed mothers. Bishop followed the feed chain and the voice he had heard every evening for years. Voss's riders tried to turn them back. Jonah and the Ridge riders moved their horses across the narrow places, not charging, not drawing weapons, simply refusing to open a lane. One of Voss's men raised a rifle. Jonah pulled his horse aside before the barrel settled. The man fired into the air. The shot frightened the main herd. For one terrible moment, 300 cattle pressed toward the lantern line. Mara saw the western slope begin to buckle under their weight. "Drop the lights!" she shouted. Mrs. Avery kicked the first lantern into a trench and covered it with a wet blanket. Others followed. Darkness opened where the false wall had been. The Voss cattle surged west into the broad fork. The Quinn cattle, already separated, continued toward Mara's chain and the open side corral. A wagon wheel broke. 2 men were thrown. 1 cow went down and rose again. Dust hid the ridge, but the plan held. Lucy closed the stone gate when Bishop passed through. The blacksmith dropped the chain across the opening. 61 Quinn cattle stood inside the basin. Mara counted twice. 47 cows, 13 calves, 1 bull. All of them. Harlan Voss rode into the basin with 4 men behind him. His face looked pale beneath the dust. "You have stolen cattle from my drive," he said. Mara dismounted. "They came when I called. A trained trick proves nothing. Then the brands will." Voss looked toward the fresh burns on June's hip. "Those animals were purchased lawfully." "From whom?" "My foreman has the papers." "Bring him." The foreman did not move. Voss turned in the saddle. "Bring the papers." The man looked at the townspeople, the wagons, the blacksmith's chain, and the red calf pressed against its mother. Then he looked at Mara. "The papers were in the barn," he said. Voss's voice sharpened. What barn? The foreman realized what he had said. No one moved. Mara heard Lucy breathe in beside the gate. The sheriff arrived at first light with the territorial stock inspector and 2 deputies from Reading Junction. By then, Voss had stopped speaking. The inspector examined the cattle. Fresh burns lay across old scars, and on 7 animals the running iron had not hidden the curved tail of the Quinn brand. The foreman was questioned separately. Before noon, he admitted the cattle had been taken from Mara's ranch. He insisted Voss had ordered only the barn burned, not the house. That distinction did not help him as much as he hoped. Voss denied everything. He blamed the foreman, accused Mara of arranging the scene, and called Jonah a known criminal. Jonah stood beside the dun horse and said nothing. Mara opened the iron document box on the tailboard of a wagon. She placed the deed, the county survey, and the pass agreement before the sheriff. The basin is mine, she said. The pass is mine. The cattle are mine. He tried to take all 3 because he thought a widow would be easier to erase than a boundary line. The stock inspector looked toward Voss. You moved nearly 400 head onto land you did not own and mixed stolen cattle into your drive. Voss's mouth tightened. You have no idea what this basin depends on. Mara did. It depended on men like Voss believing their money was the same thing as necessity. She closed the document box. Stone Gap will survive without you owning every gate, she said. The territorial case took months. 2 of Voss's men served time for rustling and arson. The foreman testified for a shorter sentence. Voss avoided prison, but he lost his railroad contract, paid restitution, and could no longer use Needle Pass without Mara's written permission. His company survived. What he lost was the right to treat another person's land as an inconvenience. The Quinn cattle returned to a ranch with no barn and half a roof. The first night, Mara and Lucy slept in Mrs. Avery's spare room while the herd rested inside temporary fencing. The next morning, the same neighbors who had watched the fire came with hammers, saws, wagons of salvaged timber, and no speeches prepared. Mara met them at the gate. A rancher removed his hat. We should have stepped in sooner. Yes, Mara said. He looked as if he had expected forgiveness to be easier. We were afraid of losing what we had. So was I. We want to help rebuild. Mara looked at the loaded wagons. The west wall goes up first. The roof pitch was wrong before, and I am not burning good cedar to repeat Owen's mistake. The rancher blinked. Then he smiled. Yes, ma'am. Mercy, Mara decided, was not pretending people had done no harm. It was giving them honest work after they admitted it. By the first snow, a new barn stood on the old foundation. It was smaller, stronger, and roofed at the proper angle. The porch still dipped at the western corner. Lucy refused to fix it. Some things should survive, she said. Mara opened Needle Pass under a written agreement signed by 27 ranch families. No single company could control it. Maintenance costs were shared. Small herds paid nothing. Large commercial drives paid enough to keep the trail repaired. The first man to sign was the rancher who had watched from the road. Jonah stayed through the rebuilding. He slept in the hay shed, reset fence posts, repaired the feed wagon, and never entered the house without knocking. Lucy questioned him relentlessly. Did Papa really ride 30 miles for you? 32. Was he afraid? Yes. Did he say anything brave? No. What did he say? Jonah considered. He said the horse was tired and I was making the whole day inconvenient. Lucy laughed so hard she dropped a bucket. Mara laughed too. It was the first time the sound had come easily since the fire. One evening, after the herd had settled, Jonah stood beside the repaired north gate with his saddle packed. Mara noticed before he said anything. You are leaving. I came to pay a debt. Did Owen ask you to? No. Then perhaps it was never his debt to collect. Jonah looked toward the new barn. What do you want me to do? The question was so simple that Mara almost answered too quickly. She looked at the fence stretching toward Needle Ridge. One section still leaned where winter wind had shifted the posts. The west line needs resetting before the ground freezes. Jonah waited. That could take a week, he said. If you work slowly. His smile was small, but it changed his whole face. I have been accused of that. He carried the saddle back to the shed. Mara did not call it a promise. She had learned not to ask tomorrow for more than it had offered. The next spring, 61 cattle became 74. Lucy took over the evening count and never missed one. When she finished, Mara struck the old feed chain twice against the wagon wheel. Clang, clang. June lifted her yellow face. Bishop turned from the far end of the pasture. Jonah gave the three-note whistle, softer than Owen had, but close enough that the herd remembered. Mara stood at the gate and watched them come home. If you had lived in Stone Gap, would you have crossed Mara's gate while the fire was still burning, or waited until the truth became safe to believe? Tell me what you think in the comments, and subscribe to Dusty Mercy for more stories from the American frontier.